More news coming in. India's envoy has slammed Canada's quote-unquote 40 years of inaction on terror in a sharply worded and even at times confrontational interview on Canada's state-backed broadcaster CBC on Tuesday. India's High Commissioner to Canada, Dinesh Patnaik, accused Canadian authorities of having failed for 40 years to act against terrorists. I have Aditya Rajkol joining me live on that story. Aditya, just take us through that explosive interview that we're now bringing to our viewers.
Well, yes, Vedika, this is the latest that we are picking up from Canada. India's High Commissioner to Canada, Dinesh Patnaik, in an interview to Canadian state broadcaster, in fact, state-backed broadcaster because they receive a lot of funding from the state government, CBC, has hit out at Canada for 40 years of silence when it comes to terrorism emanating from the Canadian soil. Now, remember, Canadian Khalistani terrorists have been involved in several terror acts in India and in Canada as well. And India has sent 29 extradition requests over the last decade, but there hasn't been any action taken by the Canadian government. Now, the Canadian envoys, time and again over the last many years, have very openly spoken to the Canadian media to the grilling questions, sometimes very argumentative and biased, but they have been very fair and transparent from the Indian government perspective. But clearly there are no answers coming in. Instead, the Canadian government, unfortunately, and the Canadian police and security services, as well as the intelligence, has given an open platform to the Canadian Khalistanis, as well as the gangsters to operate from that soil. While the Justin Trudeau government had completely failed and questioned India on the killing of a Khalistani, the reality remains that there's no evidence whatsoever that the Canadians have till date been able to provide in last more than 2 years. There's a lot of propaganda, there's a lot of misinformation that has been spread by the Canadian government and through the Canadian state media as well. But the reality that the Indian High Commissioner, the Indian envoy Dinesh Patnaik, is highlighting is that there's 40 years of silence on terrorism from the Air India bombing in the mid-80s, in which mostly Canadian citizens had died. The Canadian government has not woken up. And many of the killers who were responsible for that bombing also are on the run, are freely roaming around Canada. Apart from that, in the recent days, there has been a lot of activity of Canadian Khalistanis very much active, threatening India's sovereignty, but no action whatsoever taken by the CSIS or the Canadian authorities. So a very strongly worded interview in which Dinesh Patnaik says that, when India is asked for evidence, we understand that there might be some lack of evidence, but when we ask for evidence to Canada, there's certainly no action and there is no, understanding shown by the Canadian government. So we'll have to wait and watch how things unfold. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is trying to do damage control of the damage that Justin Trudeau has done to the relationship between New Delhi and Ottawa. But this is a very, very, dramatic interview in which the Indian envoy is questioning the stance of Canada when it comes to countering terrorism.
Dramatic and scathing. Very important to note that he goes on to even say Canada's long inaction had created a permissive environment for extremism and violence targeting India. Aditya Rajkol, thank you for joining me live.